having a sense of purpose, I think, can be very, it's life-affirming, and it also can help you to face the declines of age. Changed, at least from what I can tell, in the ways we take notes and journal and make appointments. And I looked at timeline visualizations of past and future that I think could really revolutionize the way we see things.
Hi, the following is a conversation with William Jones, Research Associate Professor Emeritus in the Information School at the University of Washington, where he works on the challenges of keeping found things found. He's worked in the areas of personal information management, human-computer interaction, information retrieval or search, and human cognition and memory. His current area of work is information, knowledge, and successful aging, about which he's been holding seminars which I've had the great pleasure to attend. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. What do we mean when we talk about keeping found things found and personal information management?
Keeping found things found is a phrase that I came up with many, many years ago, back in 2000 or 2001, and it kind of captures a lot of what personal information management is about, finding information is relatively easy. Keeping it found is difficult. We get an enormous amount of information when we do any search on the web, for example. And we don't have time in general to consume all of that information at the time that we do the query, so we want to set it aside for later. And we have lots of examples in our lives where we're not as good at keeping things found for later use. I just had a recent example where I had codes for a condominium, and I thought I had saved them in a proper spot, but I didn't, and I looked and looked and looked in all the usual places. I spent at least a half an hour looking, and I finally came up with the idea that the realtor probably sent me the codes at some point, and sure enough, I did go back and finally find it. But that's an example of failure on my part to keep found things found, at least found in the sense of getting them back to them again in a timely manner. So that's a big part of what personal information management is about, and the phrase is a lot more catchy than personal information management. When I tell people I'm doing personal information management, they look at me as if I were maybe selling life insurance policies or something. They kind of have a blank stare. But when I say I study keeping, it's all about keeping found things found, they say, well, that's my problem. So that's a...
And when we talk about, if we break down the phrase basically, keeping found things found, what are the different processes that we find things initially, and how do we store them?
Well, I mean, the obvious example is we search the web. We use Google or Bing or DuckDuckGo, and we get information. And we get back lots of information. So that's one example. But we also search our email inboxes, for example. Increasingly, people are leaving all of their email in the inboxes. Now, there's still a divide between people that can't stand leaving at the end of the day if there are still email messages in their inbox. So for them, it still represents things that need to be done, and they want to complete them. But for more and more people, it's just everything stays in the inbox, and we just search it. That itself is a revolution in personal information management support. Fast index search wasn't around in the 90s when I was a program manager at Microsoft. And so if I did a search of email to find a previous email, I would probably go out to lunch or do something else that would take about a half an hour to finish. It was just that much slower. So that's another example. And another example is we navigate through, for the few people that still use file folders, we navigate through their file folders. I still use file folders, and so that's another example.
And if we look at, for example, using folders compared to using search, do you think there's something that's slightly lost when we have access to search engines, that we kind of can have scattered data sets instead of having to actually go through the process of putting things in specific places? And there is kind of even like a passive information analysis going on when we're using folders.
I think that's a very good point, Avid, and excuse me. I have chronic allergies, so I will be coughing occasionally. It is the act of deciding to put things in folders is an act of categorization. And that brings you a little bit closer to the information, gives you a little deeper understanding of what it is that you're putting away, whether you're putting away a document that you're working on, or you're putting away an Excel spreadsheet that analyzes different things that you're doing. So if you just leave it without having to put it anywhere, you maybe have processed the information less than might be efficacious for you. And yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I don't know. It's interesting. These days I'm especially interested in the divide, or I'm interested in what happens as we get older. And there is some evidence to suggest that people may actually prefer to search the older they are, and that is partly because our spatial abilities, our sense of location spatially, and our working memory are on gradual decline as we age, starting as early as when we turn 20. So everybody out of college is probably already on one or another point on a curve of gradual decline. But people can do direct search, and there are studies that suggest that direct search, which is what we do when we search on Google or in Bing or web search service, and it's maybe more and more what we're inclined to do with our files, although that there's still the verdict is still out on that. But the more there's evidence that ability doesn't decline with age, and so there are reasons that as we get older, we may find ourselves doing more and more direct search to get back to information versus navigating through folders.
And what do you think about, the thing about search that is quite interesting to me, I think that it is also undergoing a very interesting AI boost. My own startup, we are mostly these days working with, for example, embedding massive data sets and then allowing AI model basically to just instead of just having to search for it, you just write a prompt to it. I wonder if you think there might be like a path where we just put all our data out to, for example, our personalized AI model and start just interacting with our data in a personal manner.
Well, that date may have already arrived. I don't know. What you'll have to say a little bit more about what you. If we're talking about searching on the web, for example, how would that change? What are you envisioning?
Well, I think a very interesting development has been perplexity. I don't know if you know it, but
I've heard about it.
It's a very interesting way to do searches because as someone who works in academia, I consider myself to be quite good at searching. And I think most people that work in research have to have a good capability of searching, because we need to find specific things. But suddenly there is this tool that provides a much easier way of interacting with a search engine to you. So instead of having to write some specific keywords, you can just basically write a very human natural language query to it, and it will give you a very good result. And it has been gaining quite a lot of traction in the past few years. So it's very interesting for me to see how people can interact with search engines in a much more personalized way.
Yeah, I think that is the trend of the future. There's we could go even farther and say that in the book that I'm editing with 4 co-editors called Thrive in Time, Age Audaciously is the subtitle. That's a working title, so that may change depending on what our publisher, Cambridge Press, decides in the end is the best way to label the book. But we have one last chapter before the concluding chapter on our personal spaces of information. And the thought is that more and more we write, there's a little section in the book about, or in the chapter about acronyms that most people haven't heard of anymore, but they used to be very commonly used. WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. That's just the way it is now. So there's no longer any revolutionary thing to say that. And there's also WIMP, Windows Icons, Menus, and Pointing Devices. Now that's still a very common way of interacting with our computers, but I think that's gradually being replaced by we're sort of back to the future to command lines, but command lines not with complicated syntax, but just with sort of commands like, I want this document to be formatted some way, so just make it happen. So there's more and more a sense that we can just tell me what I need to know about generative AI, for example. Don't give me a long list of results. Just tell me what I need to know. And let me have a dialogue with you so that I can continue that dialogue. And the same thing when we're talking about doing more conventional tasks in a word processor or on a web browser. We're just sort of, just make it so. Just do this. And no, a little bit, not quite that way, just do a little more of that, and make the font just a little bit bigger, and whatever you want to say. The idea that you are no longer you're no longer using Windows icons, menus, and pointing devices. You're back to command lines, but in a much more interpretive way than back in the days of line-based editors, which is a long time ago.
And when it comes to slightly embodied information and visual information, what do you think about search engines there? I mean, something I have been using the past year quite a lot is taking pictures of whiteboards when I write something on them. And then all I do is just write whiteboard on my phone, and all the pictures of whiteboards I have just pop up, because every picture I have is there. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if...
That's nice.
It's a really nice trick, because you can basically just, or if you have like a note, you can just, because of the machine learning text detection models, you can just search anything you want. What do you think about those type of searches?
I'd like it to go farther than that. I'd like to have it summarize those whiteboards and understand what the text is on the whiteboards. And I'd like more and more to have a dialogue with, what do we want to call it? Our alter ego. I've been calling it MeGPT. Is there anything, can we just refer to that now? Or So my MeGPT would just, it's a little bit cumbersome to say, my William Plus, we could say, would be, I would have a dialogue with him about the whiteboards, and my alter ego might ask me some questions in turn. It's like, so, and I, it would go back and forth, and I would have a better understanding there of what was on the whiteboard and how I could use it going forward in my life.
And on a personal level, how much would you, and I always am cautious about asking personal questions from academics, but...
From academics? Well, I'm not strictly an academic. I've been in the private sector before, too.
You know, but it's hard to get opinions out of people. But what would you recommend to people about how much they should try to memorize things compared to trying to just use these very convenient tools? As we mentioned earlier, there is something that is slightly getting lost for a slight upgrade, but I always am a bit cautious about how much do I need to be, take care of, like, trying to memorize things. I've started trying to memorize more poems these days, and try to read a poem of Blake every night and try to...
Oh, he's one of my favorite poets, too. Yeah.
So, what would you recommend to people? To how much, or what processes should they try to memorize?
Well, I think the more general, I think you and I have had this discussion before, and I know I've had it with Masood as well, that...
By the way, this is Masood Rangras, just to...
Okay,
yeah, exactly.
Also, Avid and Masood and I were all in the same seminar series, weekly seminar meetings together. I think that I can remember way before your time, back in the, when was it anyway? It was the early 1970s, they came out with something called the Bomar Brain. It was the first pocket calculator, and it was magical back then. That was a long time before. That was at least a decade before any personal computers, and certainly a couple of decades before there were laptops. But this was magical. And people were concerned, well, now if we have that, we're just going to completely lose the ability to do arithmetic, because it'll all be done for us. Well, I don't think it's really happened that way, but I do think that we need to always understand, we need to have our brains as a backup for what's out there. Whether it's, if we punch in some numbers these days, we would maybe speak them into our phone to get back calculations. We should have a sense of what's reasonable and what isn't in the answers. And the same thing now when we use GPS, we should have a sense of, well, are we really going to the right place? That's happened to me before, that it took me way out into the middle of nowhere, and I needed at some point to go back to the brain as a backup. This doesn't make sense. This is probably not the right way. So I think now, as to consciously exercising our brains, I think that's always a good idea to do. And I think, I hope for me that my technologies, my information tools, my William Plus as an alter ego would help me in that. It would bring up pictures, for example, that I've taken and say, ask me to say a little bit more about that, provide a live caption. And in doing that, I'm reminded of the incident that made me take the picture. And so the net effect is that everything is strengthened. I have not only the picture, but I have memories that evokes, and I have a life caption, a sort of a mini story to link things together. So I think it's really important for us to exercise our brains. And I think one of the worst metaphors for our brains is that they're like a hard drive with limited, so, oh, my hard drive is full, I can't learn anymore. That's just, there's no evidence to suggest that at all. what we think is that the brain is profoundly associative. So it's not like it's not the case that you're going to run out of associations. So the more you work your brain, the better. The more associations you make, the more stories you tell, the more ways that you interconnect your memories, the better. And it's not like you'll ever reach a hard drive limit and be forced to delete things.
And when it comes to our, let's call them, and we can patent this, our plus versions, so the William Plus or Avid Plus, what tasks would you like to offload onto them, and what do you want to actually, like just as some general tasks, would you not want them to actually do for you and want to retain yourself?
Well, that's a really good question, and I think we had a discussion in one of the seminars about that.
We should have recorded all the seminars then.
But I recall you were maybe a little skeptical that there was that much routine in a day that could be automated. Maybe it was someone else in the class, I don't remember.
Well, I believe that if it needs to be aligned with us on a daily basis so that it doesn't drift away too far from who we are.
Yes.
And that alignment problem is kind of something that you have to kind of reload your personal information to. It's like maybe every month to like say, these are the things that happened to me while you weren't with me.
Yeah, I think I was just noticing a couple of days ago I was doing some very repetitive things having to do with working with my co-editors on the book. And then there was another example of, I think even sending out announcements for the seminar series that we were involved in and spreading the word. I was basically sending out the same email message to different groups, slightly changing it slightly to reflect the nature of the group I was sending it to or the person I was sending it to. Hi Avid or hi Masood versus hi someone else. And but otherwise it was quite routine. And as we all know, email can take up a lot of time, even if you're doing very routine things with it, repetitive routine things. And so that's a prime candidate for automation and for a me GPT that would do things for you. I am very hopeful that our autofill or our autocomplete suggested completions can go well beyond just suggesting what the next word is in the sentence we're typing to be the task, even the task in a typical day. And I see that obviously there's some dangers in that, but I see it as a way to liberate us to do more things that we would like to do if we only had time to do them. There's a famous quote by Licklider, who was a famous pioneer in human-computer interaction, and he was on a sabbatical from MIT, and he had lots of time to do things that he wanted to do in his life, research projects. But he said, I realized that to an astonishing degree, and I'm not getting the quote exactly right, but to an astonishing degree, what I could do was limited by clerical feasibility. So it's just the clerical. I think the clerical could be automated away. And I see that as an especially important thing for us as we age. As we age, we do we slow gradually with normal aging in the speed with which we can handle information, even in the speed with which we can reach in a Windows icon menu pointing device interface, the speed with which we can reach an icon and click it. That just slows gradually up to twice as slow if you're older than if you're younger. But I see those as prime candidates for automation, so that there's a general theme in the things I'm looking at now, that the notion of a rising boat, and that that raises all the boats. So everyone benefits, and there are information tools already out there, even a full screen editor, which we all have now, versus a line-based editor. There's evidence that's better for everyone, but it's especially good for older people. And in some studies, that means that their performance is comparable to a younger person's performance. So that's what I would hope for in these general auto-completes or autofill generative AI applications.
And this is, by the way, the quote by John F. Kennedy about one tide raises all the boats, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
But I wonder, because there are these days numerous startups working with different type of emblems that you can carry with you around. And they have cameras and they have microphones that are constantly on and taking all the information that you're taking on. There is the humane AI pin that you pin to your chest and walk around with it, and it's connected to
I haven't heard
ChatGPT.
about that. Humane AI pin.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then there's another one which got quite famous, the friend emblem. Basically, it's a type of a medallion that you carry around with you, and it's an AI in it, and you can talk with it during the day.
Oh. Okay.
What do you think is going to be the way that we embody these and carry around these type of plus versions of ourselves with them? And also there is the neural implants, which me and you have a slight disagreement about, but we are at, of course, a very early period of those, but we are seeing people with paralysis use them.
Oh, absolutely.
To take in both visual data and also something that was for me really interesting was someone using just their brain implant to move a cursor on a computer and play chess with it.
Well, yeah, we had a discussion in maybe it was the second to last seminar about that. I read an article once about neural implants. They're not a new idea, of course. They've been around for decades, and the skeptical in the article said that our sensory and motor apparatus is already richly connected to the brain with millions, billions of connections. So what makes us think that a single little neural implant is going to do anything above and beyond that? With the obvious exception that there are for people that are paralyzed, or possibly for people that are blind. That's another potential application. They are a very important thing. But for people with normal sensory and motor abilities, I'm a little skeptical that these implants can do more beyond what is already there. But I think there was a more general question there.
It's about how do we embody these plus versions of ourselves.
Right. Yeah, that's the plus version.
What would you say is the ideal way of embodying them?
It's not something that I've given a lot of thought to. For people that wear glasses, I could imagine that. I think that one embodiment is already there. That we are quite accustomed to wearing, earpods. We're quite accustomed to doing that and carrying on conversations. So that's already an embodiment. And when I'm talking on my earbuds, I guess is what they're. When I'm doing that, I see, in the subway, for example, nobody's going to look at me and think he's crazy. What's going on? He's talking to himself. No. So if instead of another person, I'm talking to William Plus, no one would know. And that's my ongoing dialogue. So above and beyond that, there's the visual. And I don't know how, I'm not sure when you were talking about something on your chest or something, I think we've already got it with respect, we already have it really with our smartphones and our earbuds. I think the visual is missing from that, and so I could imagine that might be a reason for people to wear glasses, even if they don't need them otherwise, just to see that extended reality. Yeah.
So there are, of course, Meta recently actually introduced these type of AI glasses that you are constantly on. There is their Orion project. So I think it's a really interesting, I mean, having read quite a few of your papers, it's very interesting that a lot of them are suddenly all being enabled through these AI models. And I wonder, what do you think is so specific, so special about language that has, or better to say, these LLMs that suddenly have enabled so many of these sudden jumps in these technologies that you can carry around with you and help you with your personal information? What is it? I mean, you mentioned like talking with someone on when you're walking around using an earbud. No one looks at you weirdly these days.
No.
And you can be doing that, of course, with your William Plus. We had a discussion about we actually sometimes like to talk with ourselves as just a way of processing information.
Absolutely.
What do you think is so special about language that kind of helps us process information and has been the reason so many of these companies have been suddenly working on?
Well, I'm not sure what the question is, but I'm not familiar enough. I don't know enough about large language models. I know something about them, but language is key and to our ability to communicate with each other, and I would say it's key to our ability to, it's obviously key to our ability to tell stories, and I think stories are a key thing to, people have, over the years we've said, oh, we're the only animals that use tools. Well, not the case. We're the only animals that communicate. Well, no, other animals communicate. Whether other animals tell stories, I'm sure we'll find sooner or later that some other animals tell stories too. But I think that's that's a very important, whether it's unique or not, remains to be seen. But it's a very important human activity, storytelling, and we tell stories to ourselves. We tell stories in the future. We tell stories of the past, and so a dialogue with the plus versions of ourselves, as mediated by earbuds and a smartphone or whatever, is a way for us to understand better what it is we need to do. We would hope for our plus version to sort of ask questions and even challenge us about stories in the past. Well, is that the only interpretation of that event? Maybe you were a little bit too aggressive, or maybe you could have been shown more understanding. So storytelling is so key to our ability to understand ourselves and our lives and our world. So I'm not sure where we were going with that, but I think that's what language to me is especially important for, is telling stories.
Exactly. I mean, what I meant with the question was also to the extent that we talk with ourselves to just process or plan for something. And we use language to do that. So we already use language in just when we are having like in-mind conversation to process information and plan.
We do all the time. So it's just a small step further to go from subvocal speech, which we do all the time. We're not crazy, but we talk to ourselves all the time. We do it subvocally, and instead of that, and just vocalize it. And they've already done a lot of work. I know some of the people who pioneered that work on thinking aloud. There were think aloud protocols, and there's it's not very disruptive to go from subvocal just to vocalizing, and in that is a stream of data that could be used by the plus versions of ourselves to help us to plan for our future and understand our past, and that goes beyond that to legacy, the stories that we tell about our lives that we would like to give to our loved ones, either in this lifetime, or especially with our passing.
So a book you're working on at the moment is about aging audaciously, but also about thriving in time and aging. Could you give a short?
Yeah, and I'm not sure that that's a working title. We had a discussion. I had it with my co-editors, and one of them favored thrive with time, but I think that thrive in time is the right way to think about time. We are in time. It's not something separate from us that we have even that much control over. We are in time at every single second of our waking and sleeping lives, and so the sense that we are in it all times is I think important. And there's also a secondary meaning. You can arrive just in time. You can thrive in time. So there's sort of the sense that we can thrive in time, to age audaciously. So anyway, that's the explanation for that. But again, it may be changed by Cambridge Press.
In general, what do we mean when we try to thrive with time? And
in time.
Sorry, now I confused myself. Sorry, in time. So what is the purpose of?
Well, there are a lot of things we can do. I'm because of my lifelong interest in personal information and how personal information can make us smarter and can extend our ability to do things and complement. I've always thought of our information and our information tools as something that can complement us, can extend our abilities, and compensate for our limitations. And those three things have always been there, and I feel about them even more strongly as I get older. So for me, my interest in aging is especially centered around the things we can do with respect to supporting information tools, and I see ChatGPT as just another supporting information tool. And then also, that's information out there, information out in our environment, and the tools that we have to work with it. And that also includes other people too, and as sort of representing channels of information. But then there's the knowledge in our heads, and that's how does it get there? How can we can education? So one of the chapters in the book explores how education can help can make a difference as we age. And then the question is it ever too late to learn? And does that learning continue to have benefit? There's an ongoing debate about whether education as experienced typically by people when they're young, whether that has lifelong benefits with respect to age. Does it slow the process, the declines that we've already talked about to some degree in age, with aging? And there's an ongoing debate about that. Another explanation is no, the declines aren't any more shallow, but education gives us a higher starting point on the curve that gradually declines with advancing age. So yeah. Anyway, there's a lot of. Oh, I know what I was going to say. another thing that when you get older, although I see everybody do it, they lose their train of thought. You ask about thriving in time and what that would mean. Well, I think the fundamentals are already there. Exercise, physical exercise, vigorous physical exercise it makes a big difference. And then you go beyond that. Getting a good night's sleep is very important. And then relationships, friendships are very important. Feeling that you belong is very important. Having a sense of purpose, I think, can be very, it's life-affirming, and it also can help you to face the declines of age. And then other things, I think keeping your weight under control is an ongoing struggle for me, but I think that's an important thing to do as well. So but those things are mostly have nothing to do with information tools or knowledge. But then, in addition, if you think about your information tools and how they can help you, it can help to compensate for the declines that you experience with normal aging, and then also the knowledge in the head. How can we train? There's a series of meetings here at Côte about that, Royal Institute of Technology about that. Technology-enabled learning. It's very fascinating to think of the ways in which we might have techniques and technologies that support us in our efforts to learn and to get things in the head, so to speak, through learning and through training.
So when we talk about aging, as you mentioned earlier, the decline gradually starts from when people are in their 20s.
Yeah.
What should young people, do you think, start considering about? I mean, we mentioned, I think, a very beautiful way of putting it is basically physical health and love and friendships are perhaps some of the most important things. But what are the things people should try to take into consideration to be able to age gracefully from young, from their younger years, basically?
Say that again?
So when young people in their 20s, what should they start thinking about? What are the measures and actions to take to be able to later on be able to age gracefully?
Well, I think aging gracefully is not something you start thinking about when you're in your 60s. It's something you do all your life. So I think the answer there is just lead the life you want to lead, and that you think is a good life to lead, and maybe never think that, well, I'll start acting that way when I'm in my 40s, and now I'm going to be. So I don't have any specific advice, and I'm not sure that if we show we're looking at one general graph of people that we haven't really talked about that much, the difference between fluid and crystallized intelligence, and that's an important backdrop to the things that I've been talking about with respect to aging and successful aging. Fluid intelligence gradually declines throughout a person's adult life, starting as early as 20. Crystallized intelligence, and fluid intelligence includes working memory, it includes raw intelligence, the raw speed of information processing. That's fluid intelligence. Crystallized intelligence is vocabulary, it's general world knowledge, it's experience, and even wisdom is a part of crystallized intelligence. And that increases throughout your adult life. So the interesting thing is whether the decreases that are observed with everyone with respect to fluid intelligence can be compensated for through crystallized intelligence. And there's no, There is some evidence that suggests that's true. And so in this slide, I'll just sort of show this is a very good graph of some of the abilities that with respect to age. And so we see the fluid intelligence represented by, well, look at the crystallized intelligence, roughly represented by the grayish, dark gray graph here, and that's vocabulary. In this case, it's vocabulary is one of the measures of crystallized intelligence. One of the measures of fluid intelligence is represented by the green, which is roughly corresponds to working memory, and you can see that starts a decline as soon as you turn 20. So now there's a question about whether and then there's a thing, I'll just interrupt myself to say there's another graph here, sort of the pinkish graph here, that is roughly steady throughout adult life. It drops off more rapidly as you reach your later 60s. But otherwise, it's roughly steady. And so there's, with respect to that graph, there's maybe an explanation, and that actually represents that is a representation of another digit span. So there's a question about whether one ability increases in crystallized intelligence can compensate for declines in fluid intelligence. And so the graph I like here is the one showing two people, a young person and an older person, juggling balls. And the young person has, 7 balls in the air, I think. The older person only has 3, but we'll notice that those balls are bigger, they're heavier. So maybe the same amount of weight is being juggled in both cases. And what does that have to do with what we've been talking about? There's a thought that as you get older, you are better able to chunk things. You have more and more experiences and more knowledge, and then you can use that when you're facing a new situation. You can say, well, that reminds me of this situation. So you can chunk things. You can form bigger chunks, bigger balls that you juggle in the air. And the classic study on this is one on chess masters done by people at Carnegie Mellon, and showing that chess masters are much better at reproducing the positions on boards than are even experienced chess players, and much better than beginning chess players or novices. But that only applies if they're sensible chess positions. In this on the right side, there is just a random position, a random collection of pieces on the board, and masters are no better than anyone else when it comes to those. They have nothing to chunk it to. They have nothing to make it correspond to. They have no experiences with those, and so that's an example where crystallized intelligence can maybe make up for some of the declines in fluid intelligence.
I wonder if, and during the whole seminar period, every time we discussed crystallized intelligence and fluid intelligence, I had this thought in my mind about if we can draw any parallels with that with people's personalities as well, in the sense that people do become slightly more crystallized, or better to say, less fluid in their personalities as they age to some extent as well. We are become less and less open to new ideas.
Well, that's back to in the last session. We talked about a contract between the generations, and it certainly is the stereotype of older people, and that's true all too often, is that they are set in their ways and not willing to try new things. My son, by the way, has been reminding me that I should try perplexity for a long time, and I will. It's not that I don't want to, but I never find the time to do it. So there is something to be said for that. I don't know, but I think we can't control, as best anyone can tell, we can't slow the declines that come with the cognitive abilities associated with fluid intelligence. We can't slow those declines. Now, there is some work suggesting that immersive virtual reality training can possibly give you, for example, strengthen your memory or certain kinds of memory. But I think that's still very much something that needs to be replicated. And in general, there's no evidence that we can slow the declines of that are associated, that are grouped under fluid intelligence. But I think that we do have control over how set in our ways we are and how willing we are to try new things. And I take Zumba classes, even though I'm not exactly a dancer by nature, and so I think that we can challenge ourselves as we get older. I don't think that that's an inevitable consequence of aging, that we are set in our ways. And I think we should always, that we discussed that, if you remember, Avid, in the last session of the seminar, where we were talking about a contract between the generations. Young people should never dismiss older people, never rule them out, never say, oh, you're too old for that, or whatever. But older people also, they're part of the contract between the generations, is that they should be willing to learn new things, and they should be willing to see things in new and different ways too.
So it's actually very interesting, and I sadly missed out on the last part of the seminar. So I'm very curious to know a bit more about the contract between generations, because I think it is one of the most fascinating challenges that we are going to be facing in the developed and developing world, where we have a significant number of people that are aging to older ages these days, and the number of people that suddenly have certain declines is increasing because of rising age averages. So what should the contract between the generations be?
Well, that's still a work in progress. We had a discussion about it at in the final seminar session, and we also had a Google Doc discussing it, and people came up with ideas. I think that our plan is to include the discussion of that in the final chapter in the book as well, the Thrive in Time book that's due out in 2025. I can't say at this point much beyond what I've said. I don't think we have time to go back to the Google Doc and find out what people have written there. So, yeah. Again, it's sort of, you should challenge yourself when you're older to learn new things. Learn a new thing every day, and challenge your habits. But I think it's for each of us to develop their own program. There's a general notion that life shouldn't be totally predictable and comfortable. So you should challenge yourself to go beyond the predictable and the comfortable. And I'll share just one simple, silly little example for me. On odd and even days of the week, I try to switch the way I usually do things. So if I put my left hand in the jacket first, when I put on a jacket, then typically, then I'll sort of say, well, on even days, I'll put my right hand in the jacket first. And that's a surprising, you think about it, the number of things you do. If you're washing your face in the morning, the way you cup your hands to splash water into your face, try doing that the other way around. Try brushing your teeth with your opposite hand. That's very difficult to do. But even just something as simple as cupping your hands to splash water in your face. Try doing it the opposite way that you normally do it. So that's a silly, simple example in my life.
No, actually, I do tend to try to occasionally brush my teeth with my other hand, and it's always a very interesting experience. It's, I'm never satisfied with the quality of the brushing, so I have to. But nonetheless, I try it, and it is interesting how the body has kind of adapted in those ways. But something I always wonder about, and it is a interesting thing that to accept sometimes that maybe certain ships have passed also. I don't know if you think about that, the number of Nobel laureates that have received Nobel Prizes in physics has been mostly for the work that they have done in their 20s. And interestingly, because it kind of maybe relates to the vocabulary chart as well, and that gray line, the number of laureates that have received Nobel Prizes for their works in literature have had their most significant works during their 30s and 40s.
Yeah.
So what do you think this contract should include? Or, well, not necessarily a contract, but a certain type of acceptance, societal acceptance, that yes, maybe in certain sectors and certain studies, you might have a slight decline. That does not necessarily rule you out as a competent person in that area, but it does also mean that you might, because of being more crystallized in your ways, be less open to other ideas. One of my favorite quotes was Max Planck's physics moves one funeral at a time, which was basically the older physicists always are trying to stop the younger ones from coming with these crazy ideas.
Yes, there is a lot of that. I don't think it's just the older physicists. I think there's, with quantum mechanics, I think there were probably a fair number of younger physicists also who were opposed to that. So I don't know. I think it is true that that there are some things that are doing the research for a Nobel Prize is definitely a younger person's game, and there's no way around that. But I mean, you're challenging me, Avid, to come up with some examples. There are examples of people that have done really noteworthy work into their 70s and even into their 80s.
Oh, I doubt that not, but my point is simply just that on a statistical basis, the most significant work people, for example, have done in physics has been in the
I
late
understand.
20s. So, but that does not, I don't think that should say that that person, like, if you're in your 40s, you should, like, just leave physics. I think the contract should somehow be that you should both accept the new ideas somehow, and also...
I think we're back to accepting new ideas, and another aspect of this is the people that watch just one news channel every day, whether it's, for example, in the United States, whether it's Fox News on the right or MSNBC on the left. They should be challenging themselves. I think we ought to have the concept of a balanced diet of information, and that would apply to all of us regardless of our age. I don't know, I've talked about some tools, and there's a lot more in the book, and I've written a chapter for another book on this as well, on tools that can really, again, raise all the boats. And there is another metaphor that I invoke, the cognitive spectacles, that we wouldn't consider somebody's corrected vision or the need to wear contacts or glasses to correct their vision. We wouldn't consider that as a reason for for not hiring somebody in most jobs. Maybe still pilots, I'm not even sure if it's true there anymore. And so why not? I would hope that we might reach that point with respect to age, that cognitive spectacles, as I call them, include tools like just the simple full-screen editor that we all have today when we work on a web page or in a document. That is an example of something that has significantly reduced, in some cases eliminated, age-related differences. And so think of that as cognitive spectacles. And so that almost there are very few people of us, no matter what our age, who will ever get a Nobel Prize, but many of us can be productive and continue staying in the game, so to speak, even as we age into our 60s and even into our 70s and even into our 80s. I happen to know somebody who is just about to turn 89, and he is still very much in the game, very much a part of things these days, and making still solid contributions. So
I always like to talk about Warren Buffett, which is one of my...
Warren Buffett is a good example. Well, and the person I was thinking of is Don Norman.
Exactly.
He's very famous in human-computer interaction circles and cognitive science circles, and he's just about to turn 89. So there you go.
But this goes just like as someone who's quite an expert in this area. But what's your opinion about people that do reach a certain age where they might themselves not necessarily be willing to accept their decline? I mean, how should we try to approach that? I mean, the best example of it can be probably Joe Biden, I think, if we get a bit political.
Well, I don't think Donald Trump is that much far behind him.
No,
if you hear some of his rambling speeches, it's scary. And I do think that's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that. I think part of the answer might be, maybe that's another part of the contract between the generations, that people are willing to take tests of mental acuity periodically. It's a terrifying thought. It's a terrifying thought to me to think of what I've lost over the years, but I think it's probably a reasonable thing to expect that we all take them, but they're maybe especially important for people as they age.
And on the last question, what are some of the tools and technologies that you're looking forward to that might rise the tide for all boats?
Well, we talked about some of those. I am really looking forward to a time when I can have a William Plus that I'm in constant dialogue with. And I think we talked about the oral aspect of that it would be something that I would wear earbuds and be able to basically be in constant contact with it. I'm trying to learn Swedish and German and Spanish. And so I would love, I could well imagine that for me, when I'm on a bus or driving even, hopefully not too distracting when I'm driving, to have somebody have my plus version ask me questions about the language and engage me in a simple dialogue and even correct me when I say things the wrong way. So that would be something that I would hope for. I think visualizations are, obviously you can't drive with visualizations probably, but unless they relate directly to the road. But timeline visualizations, I'm sort of surprised at how little has changed, at least from what I can tell, in the ways we take notes and journal and make appointments. And I looked at timeline visualizations of past and future that I think could really revolutionize the way we see things and plan things. And I'll just this is a long answer since to your question, but I think that we have for past, present, and future, we have roughly corresponding to those notions of episodic memory for the past, working memory for the present, what's going on right now, what do I need to be thinking about, and prospective memory for the future. Now, there's an interesting effect in the literature, which has been dubbed the paradox of prospective memory. And that's an important thing to mention here in the context of supporting information and what I call a larger personal space of information, a psi that's just happens to represent the Greek letter for psychology that's used in psychology, for example, the Greek letter psi. And there is what's the paradox of prospective memory? It is that in laboratory tests, prospective memory is your ability to remember to do things in the future, to anticipate future events. So there's the meeting coming up. I need to be sure to bring the notes from the last meeting, and I need to be sure to send out a reminder to people or whatever. Those are part of prospective memory, a memory for future events and the ability to sort of anticipate the future. In laboratory tests, younger people do better than older people. So it's a standard difference in age, a standard age effect. But now the interesting thing I've talked about tools that level the playing field so that we are all at the same level. And there's in real world prospective memory tests, it's not only do older people perform as well as younger people, they perform better in real world prospective memories situations as younger people do in laboratory tests. Well, why would that be? The answer there are different answers. One is that older people are more motivated. That's one explanation. But what I really favor as an explanation is that the real world is essentially an open book test. You can look at your notes. You can look at the textbook if you're doing an examination in college. But and in this case, you can look at your calendar, whether it's paper or digital. You have maybe an administrative assistant. And a typical prospective memory task in sort of more real-world situations is to remember to text the experimenter twice a day or something like that. And they can put reminders. They can use reminders in their phone. They have lots of ways of cultivating support from their psi, their surrounding environment. To do that. So that's an exciting thing for me, that to the thought that we not only might we level the playing field, so to speak, but we might even find a situation where in some cases older people are doing better than younger people.
So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for participating in the podcast.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, Avid.